Long before the dragon came, the mountain stood in quiet strength. Erebor rose from the land with a presence that did not demand attention, yet could not be ignored. Its sides were steep, its stone pale in the light of day, and beneath it lay halls shaped not by haste, but by patience. If you enjoy calm stories from Middle-earth, you can stay a while, and if you'd like more like this, you can follow the channel. Now, the story begins. The dwarves had lived there for generations. Their work was steady, measured, and careful. Stone was cut with precision. Metal was shaped with skill passed down through years that few now counted. Nothing within the mountain was made without purpose, and nothing was left unfinished. At the foot of Erebor, the town of Dale had grown in its shadow. It was not built to rival the mountain, but to exist beside it. Wooden houses lined the streets, their roofs sloping gently, their windows open to the light. The people there lived differently from the dwarves, but not apart from them. Trade moved easily between the two. Doises carried between stone and wood. The river nearby brought both life and movement, its waters steady, unchanged by the passing of years. There was no reason to think that anything would disturb this. Days passed in patterns that did not need to be questioned. Morning brought work. Evening brought rest. And between them, the small, steady moments that filled a life without drawing attention to themselves. Children ran through the streets of Dale, their paths crossing without plan. Merchants opened their doors, arranging goods that would be traded before the day was done. Within Erebor, the sound of tools echoed softly through the halls, not loud, but constant. Everything had its place, everything continued. Travelers came and went, though none stayed long unless they had reason to. The road that passed near the mountain was known, but not crowded. It served those who needed it, and nothing more. There were stories, of course. There always were. Some spoke of distant lands, others of things that had happened long ago, far beyond the reach of those who now listened. But they were only stories. They did not change the rhythm of the place. They did not disturb it. Even the seasons moved without trouble. Winter came and passed. Spring returned. Nothing lingered longer than it should. Nothing arrived too early. It was a place shaped by balance, and for a long time, that was enough. Beyond the lands that surrounded Erebor, far to the north and east, there were places where things did not remain so steady. The world was larger than the mountain and the town below it, larger than the roads that led between them, and not all parts of it moved with the same calm. At first, the change was too distant to notice. A shift in trade, a delay in the arrival of travelers who were once expected, nothing that stood out on its own, nothing that demanded attention. But over time, these small differences began to gather. A merchant who did not return, a road less used than before, a quiet question asked once, then left unanswered. The people of Dale noticed it first, though they did not speak of it often. Something had changed, not here, but somewhere beyond. Within Erebor, the dwarves continued their work. They did not concern themselves easily with distant matters. The mountain had stood longer than most troubles. Its halls were deep, its strength unquestioned. What happened beyond its reach did not often find its way inside. And so, life continued, as it always had. But the world does not remain unchanged simply because one place does. The signs grew, slowly, still distant, still uncertain. A traveler arrived one evening later than expected, his path longer than it should have been. When asked, He gave little detail, only that the road had not felt as it once did. Another spoke of empty stretches where there had once been movement. Not danger, not yet, but absence, the kind that leaves space for something else to follow. These were small things, easy to overlook, easy to explain, and so they were. The rhythm of Erebor and Dale did not break. It adjusted, slightly, barely enough to be noticed. Work continued, trade continued, life continued. But beneath it, something had begun. Not visible, not immediate, but present. Like a distant sound that has not yet reached the ear. Like a shadow that has not yet fallen across the land. Far away, beyond the places these people knew, something had begun to move. Not quickly, not with urgency, but with certainty. And though no one in Dale or Erebor could yet see it, the change had already started. At first, nothing could be named clearly. There was no single moment when the change became certain. No event that could be pointed to and remembered as the beginning. Only small things, and the way they began to repeat. The roads north of Dale had always been used with care, but not avoided. Traders passed through them. Messengers took them when needed. Even those who traveled alone did not think twice, so long as the season allowed it. Now, that began to shift. Not suddenly. A cart arrived later than expected. A group of travelers chose a longer route without giving much reason. When asked, they spoke in simple terms. The road had felt empty. The distance had seemed longer. Nothing had happened, but something had been different. It was not enough to cause concern. Not yet. Within Dale, life continued without interruption. The markets opened each morning. Goods were traded as they always had been. The sound of voices filled the streets, steady and familiar. But in quiet moments, between one task and the next, the same thought returned. Something was changing. No one said it openly. There was no agreement on what it might be. But the idea remained. Within Erebor, the dwarfs heard these reports as they came, but did not act on them. The mountain had stood through greater uncertainties than this. Roads changed, trade shifted. These things had happened before. They would settle again. That was the expectation. And so the work continued. Hammers struck stone and metal in steady rhythm. The halls remained lit, their order unchanged. The deeper chambers, where fewer walked, held their silence as they always had. Nothing within the mountain suggested that anything beyond it mattered, but outside, the pattern continued. A rider came one evening, later than the light allowed. His horse showed no sign of strain, yet he spoke little, and when he did, his words were careful. He had seen no one on the road, not for longer than he could remember. No wagons, no travelers, not even those who usually moved alone. The road had been empty. That, more than anything, stayed with those who heard it, because roads are not meant to be empty. Not for long. A few days later, another traveler arrived from a different direction. His path had not crossed the same ground, yet his account was similar. Less movement, fewer signs of recent passage, no clear reason. Still, no danger. But the absence remained, and slowly that absence began to take shape in the minds of those who listened. It was not fear, not yet, but it was no longer nothing. The people of Dale began to notice the difference in their own ways. Merchants counted their goods more carefully, not because they expected loss, but because they were uncertain when more would arrive. Travelers who might once have stayed a single night remained for 2, sometimes 3, as if unsure of when they should continue. The conversations in the evening changed slightly. Still calm, still ordinary, but with pauses where there had once been none. Within Erebor, the change was slower to take hold. The mountain did not feel the absence in the same way. Its life was not tied to the roads beyond it. What it needed, it already had. Stone, metal, time. And yet, even there, the signs began to reach. A caravan expected from the south did not arrive, not late, and no message came to explain it. No word followed. It was noted, then set aside. Days passed, then more, and the pattern did not return to what it had been. Instead, it settled into something quieter. Less movement, less certainty. The roads remained open. Nothing blocked them. Nothing threatened those who used them. But fewer chose to do so. It was not a decision made openly, not something spoken. Only a quiet adjustment, the kind that spreads without being noticed. Far to the north, beyond what most in Dale had ever seen, the land had already begun to change more clearly. But that distance kept it hidden, for now. Here, the signs remained indirect. A space where something should be. A silence where something should be heard. And the feeling, growing slowly, that this was not temporary. That whatever had begun beyond their sight was not passing through. It was settling. The seasons continued. Nothing within Dale or Erebor had yet been touched, but the certainty that had once defined the place had begun to loosen. Not enough to break, only enough to shift. And once something shifts, even slightly, it does not return to exactly what it was before. The people did not speak of danger. They did not prepare for anything specific. But they began, quietly, to notice the world beyond their walls in a way they had not needed to before. The mountain still stood. The town still lived. But the space around them no longer felt the same. And though no one could yet say why, the first signs had already done their work. The day he came did not begin differently from any other. Morning light touched the sides of Erebor as it always had. The stone reflected it in pale tones, unchanged, steady. In Dale, the streets filled slowly with movement. Doors opened, voices carried. Work began without hesitation. Nothing in that early hour suggested that anything would break the pattern. And yet, before the day had fully settled, something shifted. It was not seen at first. It was heard. Not clearly, not close. A distant sound, low and uneven, as if carried across a great distance. Those who noticed it paused for a moment, then continued. It did not repeat immediately. It did not demand attention. But it had been there, and once heard, it was not easily forgotten. The air felt different soon after. Still, but not in the same way as before. There was a weight to it, difficult to name. Not wind, not silence. Something held, as if the land itself had begun to wait. In Dale, a few people looked toward the north without knowing why. Others continued their work, though with less focus than before. Small tasks slowed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, then resumed without direction. The sound came again. Closer now. Still low. Still unclear. But enough to be noticed by more than a few. Within Erebor, The dwarves paused in their work, not all at once, but in small moments. A hammer stopped. A voice fell quiet. Someone listened, then returned to what they had been doing. The mountain did not react quickly. It had no reason to. Not yet. Then came the shadow. It passed across the land without warning. Not complete darkness, not a sudden loss of light, but a shift. As if something vast had moved between the sun and the ground, changing the tone of everything beneath it. Those who saw it did not understand it at first. It did not last long, only a moment. Then it was gone. But the space it left behind felt different, more aware, more still. The sound followed again, now unmistakable, not loud, but deep, a movement of air that did not belong to wind. This time, more turned to look. The sky remained clear. Nothing could be seen, and yet the presence was there. The first true sign did not come from above. It came from the edge of the town. A man standing near the outer path stepped back without thinking, his gaze fixed on something beyond the reach of others. He did not speak immediately. Then, quietly, he did. Only one word, dragon. It did not carry far, but it did not need to. Those closest to him heard, and in that moment, something changed. Not panic, not movement, but recognition. The word settled quickly, too quickly, as if it had been waiting. More turned toward the open land. And then, at last, it was seen. Not in full, not clearly. A shape against the sky, distant but fast, moving with a steadiness that did not rush, did not hesitate. It did not circle, it did not search. It came directly. The light shifted again as it passed, longer this time. The shadows stretched across the fields, across the outer edges of Dale, reaching toward the mountain itself. Now there was no question. The movement in the town began, but it was not sudden, not chaotic. People stepped back, doors opened, voices rose, but not in confusion, only in acknowledgement. Something had arrived. Something that had been approaching for longer than any had realized. If you're still listening, there are many more quiet stories waiting here. Within Erebor, the dwarves moved toward the entrances, toward the places where the outside could be seen. The mountain did not tremble, it did not change, but those within it understood. The signs had not been without meaning. The roads, the silence, the absence, all of it had led here. The dragon descended without haste. Its wings moved with a measured force, each motion carrying it forward without strain. The air shifted around it, though the ground below remained still. It did not call out. It did not announce itself. Its presence was enough. As it drew closer, the shape became clearer, great, unmistakable, and certain. There was no doubt now, no uncertainty left to hold. Smaug had come, and he had chosen this place. He did not pass over. He did not turn aside. His path led directly toward the mountain, toward Erebor. The shadow covered the gates, the light dimmed, and for a brief moment, everything stood still, not from command, but from the weight of what was now fully known. The long distance that had once separated this place from whatever lay beyond had closed. The change that had begun quietly, far away, had arrived without needing to hurry, and now it was here. After his coming, there was no single moment that marked what followed, no clear line between what had been and what now was. The change did not arrive all at once. It settled, slowly. As time passed, the memory of that day did not fade, but it became something else. Not immediate, not sharp. Something that remained, but no longer moved. What replaced it was quieter and far more enduring. Erebor stood as it always had, but it was no longer the same. The great gates, once open to trade and passage, were closed. Not broken, not destroyed, simply shut, as if nothing beyond them needed to be reached. Within, the halls remained. Stone does not forget its shape. The pillars still rose as they had before. The long chambers still stretched into the mountain, their spaces unchanged. Treasure lay where it had been gathered, gold and gems untouched by time itself. But something had claimed it, not through effort, not through work, only through presence. Smaug did not shape the mountain, he occupied it. Deep within the halls, where the air held no movement and light did not reach unless carried, he settled, his body, vast and unmoving, rested among the treasure without need for comfort. Gold shifted slightly beneath his weight, not enough to change its place, only enough to acknowledge it. He did not move often. He did not need to. The mountain belonged to him without action, and in that stillness, time began to change. Outside, Dale did not remain as it had been. At first, there had been movement. People leaving, taking what they could carry, closing what could not be taken. But that too had passed. What remained was absence. The streets emptied, the doors stayed closed. The shapes of houses remained, but without the life that had once filled them. The town did not fall apart. It remained, but without purpose, without continuation. The river still flowed nearby, unchanged. It did not slow. It did not alter its course, but no one stood beside it now. No one drew from it. It moved through a place that no longer needed it. The land adjusted in small ways. Paths grew less clear. Grass returned where it had once been pressed down by use. The signs of life faded, not suddenly, but gradually, each day leaving a little less behind. And above it all, the mountain remained, as it always had. Now, it held something different. Smaug did not leave. He did not wander. He did not search beyond what he had taken. Everything he required was within the mountain. And so, he remained. Years passed, not marked by events, not broken by change, only counted by their passing. The seasons moved across the land, as they always had. Snow came, then melted. Green returned, then faded. Nothing in this cycle altered what had been set. The mountain did not change. The town did not return. The roads remained empty, and within Erebor, the stillness deepened. Smaug's presence filled the halls without movement. His breath, slow and steady, was the only sign that time continued within. He did not sleep as others did, but he rested. And that rest did not end. There were moments, rarely, when he shifted, when the treasure beneath him settled again, when a sound carried through the halls that had not been heard before. But these were small. They did not change anything. They did not begin any new. They only reminded the mountain of what it now held. Outside, the memory of what had happened began to take on a different form. Not immediate, not recent, something older. Something that had already become part of the past. Those who remained in distant places spoke of Erebor and Dale as they once had been, not as they were, because what they were now did not change. And what does not change becomes difficult to speak of. It becomes fixed, like a place remembered rather than lived. The dragon beneath the mountain became part of that memory, not seen, not visited, but known, in the way distant things are known, without detail, without certainty, only with the understanding that they remain. Years turned to decades. The world beyond continued. Paths shifted. Settlements grew elsewhere. Life adapted. But here, nothing followed. Nothing moved forward. The mountain held its silence. The town held its absence. And Smaug remained. Not active, not searching, only present. A stillness that did not end. As the years passed, the stillness beneath the mountain did not remain contained. It spread, not outward in force, but in absence. Places that had once been connected to Erebor and Dale began to shift in quiet ways. Roads that led toward the mountain were used less often, not by decision, but by habit forming over time. Travelers chose other paths, not always for safety, sometimes simply because there was no longer a reason to go that way. The map of the land did not change, but the movement across it did. Where once there had been a steady flow, there were now gaps. Long stretches without signs of passage. And over time, those stretches became the new pattern. The name of the mountain remained known, so did the dragon. But both became distant. Not in place, only in presence. They were spoken of less as something current and more as something fixed, a place to avoid, a thing that remained. Nothing more needed to be added. To the north and west, smaller settlements adjusted first. Communities that had once relied on trade from Dale turned elsewhere. Goods came from different directions. Routes were reestablished, not with intention, but with repetition. People adapt quickly when something is no longer available. They do not always notice the moment it happens. Only that, after some time, things are different. The river continued as it always had, but fewer followed its course near the mountain. Its banks grew quieter, unmarked. The signs of use faded until they were no longer visible at all. Even the animals changed their patterns. Paths that had once been worn by movement became overgrown. Open spaces, once disturbed regularly, settled back into stillness. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced it. The change happened because nothing prevented it. And over time, it became complete. Further away, the effect was less visible. The world did not stop. Cities continued. Roads remained active. But the absence of Erebor and Dale left a space that was not filled in the same way. Something had been removed, and what replaced it was not the same. It was quieter, less connected. Trade routes became longer, less direct. Information traveled more slowly. The flow of movement adjusted, but did not fully recover. Those who spoke of the North did so with less detail as time passed, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing new had happened. And without change, there is little to add. the story remained the same. A mountain, a dragon, a silence that did not end. Smaug himself did not move beyond what he had taken. He did not extend his reach. He did not seek out what lay beyond. There was no need. Everything he required remained beneath him. And so, the world adjusted around that still point, not resisting it, not confronting it, only bending slightly until it no longer needed to consider it at all. This is how such changes settle, not through conflict, but through time. The memory of what had been before Erebor's fall grew softer in distant places, not forgotten, but less immediate. A generation passed, then another. Those who had seen Dale as it was became fewer. Those who had only heard of it became more, and their understanding was different, less detailed, more shaped by distance. To them, the mountain had always been as it now was, a place marked on maps, a place not visited, a place that simply remained. The dragon became part of that understanding, not as something active, but as something constant. And constants do not draw attention. They are accepted, set aside, left where they are. Closer to the mountain, the silence remained unchanged. The town did not return. The roads did not recover. The land held its stillness, and within Erebor, Smaug rested as he always had, unmoved by the passing of years, unchanged by the shifting world beyond. Time moved around him, but did not touch him. And so, the change that had begun with his coming did not end with it. It continued, quietly, until it became the way things were. There comes a point when stillness is no longer noticed, not because it has ended, but because it has remained for so long that it feels permanent. The lands around Erebor had reached that point. What had once been absence had settled into expectation. No one waited for change anymore. No one spoke of return in any immediate way. The idea had not been abandoned, but it had been set aside. There was no sign that anything would alter what had been established, and so life continued elsewhere. Generations passed beyond the mountain. Children grew into lives that had never known Dale as it had been. The stories they heard were consistent, but distant. The details softened over time, not from loss, but from repetition without renewal. A place remembered without being seen begins to lose its edges. It becomes simpler, less exact, more certain in its outline, but less clear in its truth. Erebor became such a place, a mountain that existed in knowledge, not experience. A place spoke it due, still clear. The dragon within it remained part of that understanding. Not as something that moved or acted, but as something that endured. Smaug had not been seen in many years. No new account described him. No traveler returned with fresh detail. And yet, no one doubted that he remained. That certainty replaced the need for proof. And over time, it replaced curiosity as well. The road toward the mountain no longer carried even the thought of travel. It was simply not used. Grass grew across it in places where the ground had once been worn smooth. Stones shifted slightly, settling into patterns shaped by weather rather than movement. The path did not disappear, but it was no longer a path in the way it had been. It became part of the land, unmarked, unneeded. The river continued to move beside it, its course unchanged, its sound steady. But even it seemed quieter now, not in volume, but in presence. There was no one to listen to it, no one to follow its edge. It moved through a space that had lost its purpose for those who once depended on it. Within the mountain, nothing changed. The halls remained, the treasure remained, and Smaug remained. His presence did not diminish. It did not grow, it simply continued. Time passed over him without leaving a mark. He did not age in any way that could be seen. He did not shift in habit. The stillness held, and because it held for so long, it became something else. Not just absence, not just silence, but weight, a kind of quiet that did not lift, that did not open, that did not suggest anything beyond itself. There were no signs that it would end, no small changes building towards something new. Only continuation. And in that continuation, something settled deeply into the land. Not fear, that had passed long ago. Not expectation, that had faded with time. But acceptance, a recognition that this was simply how things were. The mountain was no longer thought of as a place that might change. It was a place that had already settled into its final state. The dragon beneath it was not a threat waiting to act. He was a presence that had already claimed what he would. And nothing more followed. Years continued to pass, quietly, without event. The world beyond moved forward in its own ways, but this place did not follow. It remained where it had stopped, and in that stillness, something was lost. Not in a sudden way, not in a way that could be named, but in the slow fading of possibility, because a place that does not change for long enough begins to feel as though it cannot. And when that feeling takes hold, even the thought of change becomes distant. Erebor had reached that point. The land around it had settled into the same understanding, and Smaug, unmoving beneath the mountain, remained at the center of it all. Not as something active, but as something that had already done what it came to do, and now simply endured. For many years, nothing had changed, and because of that, no one expected that it would. The mountain remained as it had been. The silence held. The roads were unused. The dragon beneath Erebor existed more as certainty than as presence, but stillness, even when it lasts long, does not remain untouched forever. The change, when it came, did not begin with the dragon. It began with movement. Far from the mountain, along roads that had once been avoided, people began to travel again. Not in great numbers, and not all at once, but enough to be noticed. Small groups, careful steps. A return, not driven by confidence, but by necessity, and by something else. A memory that had not fully faded. Among those who heard of it, the idea of the mountain shifted slightly. Not enough to remove what had settled over it, but enough to allow thought where there had been none. Erebor was still what it had been, but now it was no longer entirely beyond reach. This change moved slowly, quietly. It did not disturb the land. It did not reach the dragon. Not yet. Within the mountain, Smaug remained as he always had, unmoving, unconcerned. Time continued to pass over him without meaning, until, at last, something did reach him. Not force, not threat, but presence. A sound where there had been none. A movement within the halls. Small, almost nothing, but different. For the first time in many years, the stillness shifted. Not broken, but touched. Smaug stirred. Not fully, not with urgency. Only enough to acknowledge that something within his domain had changed. The treasure beneath him shifted slightly as he moved. The sound carried through the halls, faint but clear. Stone answered it in echo, as it always had. But now there was something else. Another presence. Brief, distant, yet real. This was not the silence he had known. This was not the long, unbroken stillness that had settled into place. Something had entered it. And because of that, the mountain itself felt different. Smaug did not leave his place immediately. He did not search without reason, but he was no longer fully at rest. The stillness that had defined his time beneath the mountain had ended. Outside, the world had already begun to move toward this moment. The quiet return of travelers, the reopening of thought, the slow shift in what had once been accepted as unchanging. All of it had led here, and now it reached its end. Smaug rose. Slowly, his movement filled the space around him, not with sound, but with presence. The treasure moved beneath him once more, settling as he lifted himself from it. For the first time in many years, he did not remain. He moved through the halls, toward the open paths that led upward. The mountain, unchanged for so long, now held movement again. When he emerged, the world outside had not yet adjusted. The sky remained as it was. The land held its form. But the moment had shifted. The dragon took to the air once more, not as he had when he first came, but with the same certainty, the same presence. The stillness that had lasted for so long had reached its end, and in its place, something final had begun. Far away, Bard stood among others who had not forgotten what the mountain had been. He did not stand as a figure of legend, only as someone who had remained, who had listened, who had watched, and who now understood what was coming. There was no confusion, no hesitation, only recognition. The moment that had been distant for so long had arrived. The dragon approached, not hidden, not uncertain, and for the first time since his coming, he did not return to the mountain. The end of his time did not unfold in chaos. It unfolded in clarity. The presence that had defined the land for so long met something that did not move away from it. The arrow was loosed, not in haste, not in fear, but in understanding. It found its place. And in that moment, the long stillness broke. Not slowly, but completely. Smaug's movement faltered. The air that had carried him no longer held him in the same way. And for the first time since his coming, the certainty of his presence changed. The dragon fell, not as something that vanished, but as something that ended. His time, which had stretched across years without change, closed in a single moment. The land received it without resistance. The mountain remained, the town remained. The world did not stop, but something that had held it in place for so long was no longer there. And in that absence, something else could begin. Not immediately, not all at once, but where stillness had lasted too long, change returned. If this story helped you rest, there are more waiting for you. Another journey is already beginning, and you can stay. if you'd like. And if you return often, you can follow the channel. Good night.